Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hopefully you guys had a nice week. We've made it to Friday, which means we've got Purdue basketball tonight, Pacers basketball tonight, Indiana football tomorrow, Colts football Sunday, Indiana basketball on Sunday. It's really just the best time of the year. I know my wife loves it because we just watch sports all the time, and that's her favorite thing to do. But we're going to start looking ahead to Sunday. Colts taking on the Bills. The Colts are somehow, some way, only 3.5-point underdogs in that one. Joe Flacco and the Colts playing host to the Bills, the third best team in the NFL. On Sunday, big game for the Colts. They're currently a game and a half back of the Chargers, a game back of the Broncos. The Bengals are 4-6, kind of fighting for that final wild card spot as well. And I don't like throwing out the word must win or that phrase. It's kind of annoying, but if the Colts fall to 4-6, the path to them grabbing that last wild card spot just feels so much tougher. They need to win on Sunday to kind of stay at 500. And it's really important, I think, not just, obviously for the team, but I think just for the image of the franchise. When you make the switch to Joe Flacco and you say that you're making that switch to make the playoffs, then I just don't think it looks good if you start out 0-2 after you make that switch. And to fall to 1-3 with Joe Flacco as the starter, I don't think that'd be good for anybody. Colts fans are going to be upset. Questions like, why are we benching Anthony Richardson if we're trying to make the playoffs just for us to go 0-2 after we name Joe Flacco the starter? I thought this move was supposed to lead to wins, which all those questions would be very valid. But if you've been listening to this show, then you would know that starting Joe Flacco does not lead to wins. It just leads to more bad football. And so in addition to Colts fans being upset, I think that the Colts would feel ridiculous after, Shane Steichen stood up at the podium and announced to the NFL world they were benching Anthony Richardson so they could win right now. Doing that just to fall to 4-6, I think it would actually be kind of funny. I don't know. Probably not. You probably don't like that I said that, but that's just the truth. I think that other fan bases would laugh at the Colts of like, you thought your team was so much better than what it is, even though the history of the Colts franchise over the last 6 years points to the franchise simply, or the roster, not being very good. When they've had journeyman quarterbacks like Joe Flacco, the Carson Wentz year, the Matt Ryan year, the Gardner Minshew year, all those years, they didn't make the playoffs because the roster, which is the same now as it was back then, just simply isn't very good. And Sunday's game is so incredibly important. And once again, the fact that the Bills are only favored by 3.5 points just feels way too low. And despite that line being so close, this game won't be. If the Bills don't win by double digits on Sunday, I will be surprised. They are just simply way better roster-wise, quarterback-wise, coach-wise. They are so much better than the Colts are. Okay, the Colts don't have any defensive back who can defend Amari Cooper, who looks like he's going to return to action this Sunday after not playing last week. I like Jalen Jones, but he struggled against the better receivers in the NFL that he's had to cover. If you don't believe me, just go back and watch him try to guard Justin Jefferson last week on Sunday Night Football. And it's not even just Amari Cooper and Josh Allen in this electric passing attack that the Buffalo Bills have that the Colts need to be concerned with. The Bills are incredibly balanced. They're one of the most balanced offenses in the NFL since promoting Joe Brady to offensive coordinator at the end of last year. On average, the Bills throw the football about 29 times a game, and they run the ball 27 times a game on average, which means that, this isn't like you're playing, Michigan like Indiana's going to on Saturday, and you only have to worry about one element of the offense because James Cook of the Bills is one of the best running backs in the league. Okay, we all know who Josh Allen is. We all know what he's capable of. We all know who Amari Cooper is and what he's capable of, right? There's potential for Keon Coleman, the Bills' second best receiver, not to play, but they still have Khalil Shakir, who's one of the better small kind of slot receivers in the NFL. So we know that the Bills are going to find success throwing the football simply because they have Josh Allen. They could have me out there playing receiver, and Josh Allen would figure out a way to complete some passes. Okay, so I don't think I need to talk too much about the Bills and their passing attack. Opposed to that, I want to talk about the run game, because this is the part of the Bills offense that isn't talked about enough. They're averaging over 4 yards a carry this year, and they're going to find a lot of success against this Colts defense. And I say that because every team has found success against this Colts defense. There are only 3 teams in the NFL who give up more yards per game than the Indianapolis Colts do. Okay, teams always move the football against this Colts unit. The front 7 hasn't been as good as it was advertised in the offseason. We all knew about the struggles that they were going to have in the secondary because they just haven't invested in any draft picks or trades, or they haven't signed anybody in free agency to shore up the back end. And so we all knew about the struggles on the back end, but the front 7 has been incredibly disappointing. Despite the struggles for the Colts to get off the field, they have figured out a way to keep teams from scoring. They are 12th in the NFL in points per game allowed, which just doesn't make sense when you give up that many yards and you don't give up points. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And because it doesn't, Kent Sterling, friend of the program, he does the Power Hour with Dan Dockich from 2 to 3 every Monday. Kent asked Gus Bradley, Colts defensive coordinator, a fantastic question about whether or not the yards allowed per game stat matters or not. Here is Colts defensive coordinator Gus Bradley addressing that question.
I think that, we look at it because if we were giving up 350 yards a game, we would surely look at it. We would sit down and look at it and say, hey, what's the issue here? And so I think there is some importance to stats because you look at them to see if there's any issues that you need to get taken care of. And then I think that you have a determination to say, well, let's say they carried it 60 times for 180 yards. You'd say, well, 3 yards per carry. All right, but you look at it. So I'm not going to sit here and say you don't look at it. But I think ultimately, Kent, we look at points and we say, hey, where are we at in points per game? Because ultimately, as a coach and as a team, that's ultimately what you're concerned about. Do we give ourselves a chance to win? Do we put ourselves in position to win? But I do think you look at stats to see if there's an underlying problem. Maybe you're giving up a lot of points and you're giving up a lot of yards rushing and you see it. And, there's 2 things go hand in hand you're looking at and you're saying, well, it's pretty evident we need to make some changes. So to answer your question, I know it's a little long-winded. Yes, I do think you look at those things. But I think in the coach's world, ultimately you're looking at points and saying, hey, do we give ourselves a chance to win? And are we creating enough opportunities for our offense to win, or, to score?
That was Colts defensive coordinator Gus Bradley right there answering the question of, does the yards per game stat matter? And I love how at the start he says, well, if you're giving up like 350 yards a game, there's clearly something wrong. And, the Colts are fine there. They aren't giving up 350 yards a game. They're giving up 380 yards a game. So they're totally fine in that regard. But to the credit of Gus Bradley and his defense and kind of what he alluded to there at the end, teams don't score points. Okay, the Colts are 12th in the NFL in points allowed per game, giving up less than 21 points a game. The issue when you watch the Indianapolis Colts play defense is they are a turnover-dependent defense. Okay, and to me, being turnover-dependent on the defensive side of the ball is like taking a job with a low salary but high and infrequent bonuses and relying on those bonuses. Like the week-to-week paycheck isn't really enough to live on, but if that bonus hits, it allows you to pay a lot of the bills that you have and to keep your house. And that's a terrible way to live, because what if the bonus that you need doesn't show up? Right? And for the Colts, in their case, when that bonus doesn't show up, when those turnovers don't show up, they give up 29 points to the Houston Texans in week 1 when they didn't force a turnover. In fact, when those bonuses don't show up, the Colts are 1-3 in games where they don't force at least 2 turnovers. Okay, the Colts defense is not good. They don't get off the field on third down. They have the 24th ranked third down defense in the NFL. They don't get stops in the red zone. They're 17th in red zone touchdown percentage. Okay, teams score touchdowns in the red zone about 58% of the time against the Colts. That's not good. Okay, those are, the yards per game, the bad third down defense, the lack of good red zone defense. All 3 of those things point to this Colts defense not being good. Okay, the only reason why they've kept the scoring down is because they found a way to force turnovers. They're 7th in the NFL in takeaways per game, which is a good thing, right? You know, you force turnovers. Obviously, that's not only a stop, but it gives you an opportunity to set your offense up with good field position. That's great. The issue is they're playing the Bills this week, and the Bills simply do not turn the football over. They are 2nd in the NFL in giveaways per game at 0.4. Josh Allen, a guy who struggled with interceptions throughout the year or throughout his career, he's only thrown 2 this year. Okay, and James Cook is as sure-handed when it comes to holding onto the football as any other running back in the NFL. The Colts likely will not be able to rely on turning the Bills over in this game. And because of that, the Bills are going to score a ton of points. And this Colts offense simply doesn't have the firepower to keep up with them. Okay, I know that there's some Joe Flacco truthers out there who think he's, the best thing since Jesus, even though he's 39 years old. And when you look at his past 3 years, he hasn't been very good. Doesn't matter to some of y'all. He's still great, apparently. Yeah, sorry, but this Colts offense with Joe Flacco isn't going to go score for score with the Bills against this Bills defense. Okay, the Bills are 8th in the NFL in points allowed per game. Okay, 17th in yards allowed per game. And they have the 7th best red zone defense in the NFL when it comes to touchdowns allowed once teams enter the red zone. Okay, now, this is the NFL, right? And while all these numbers point directly to the Bills absolutely throttling the Colts on Sunday, which is what I expect to happen, there is a path to victory for the Colts. The only way the Colts win on Sunday is if Jonathan Taylor has a monster game, which is a very possible thing, right? The Bills are missing Matt Milano, one of the best middle linebackers in the NFL. He tore his biceps before the season started, which sounds terrible. And because of that, they are 26th in the NFL in yards per carry allowed at 4.8. Okay, Jonathan Taylor, he's one of the better running backs in the league, as we all know. And if he has a game where he averages 4.5 yards a carry, then the Colts are going to be able to move the football. And, as much as I rag on Joe Flacco and as much as I don't believe in Joe Flacco can convert 3rd and 4. I just don't trust him on 3rd and 8 or more, right? But 3rd and short, Joe Flacco, he can hit Josh Downs on a slant route, and they can move the chains. Okay, but in order for that to happen, the run game has to be there. But as we all know, the Colts yards per carry with Joe Flacco drops dramatically to only 3.7 yards per carry as opposed to over 5 yards a carry when Anthony Richardson is in the game. So because of that, Jonathan Taylor having success on the ground isn't a guarantee. Okay, so we'll kind of see how that plays out. But if the Colts want to win on Sunday, Jonathan Taylor has to have a good game. Bottom line, though, the Bills are better than the Colts, and they don't turn the ball over, right? Like, that's how bad teams win games against teams that are better than them. They rely on turnovers. And the Bills, they don't turn the ball over. I think this is a bad matchup for the Colts. Bills win 34-21. This will be the first game this year that the Colts lose by more than one possession. Colts aren't the only team playing this weekend. The Pacers play tonight. They also play here at home against the Knicks on Sunday. So Tony East, he's set to join me at about 10:20 to talk Pacers. And, they're 4-4 now. It seems like they're starting to figure things out. But before I have Tony on here in about 4 minutes, I very quickly want to give out the Kirk Cousins bet of the week. For those of you who don't know what the Kirk Cousins bet of the week is, we take a road underdog on the money line. We're 2-1 so far.
Walk into your trap, take over your trap. That's the line he would say. You go into someone else's stadium and you try to assert yourself.
That's Joe Flacco right there. Or not Joe Flacco. That's Kirk Cousins right there. And that's why we do this bit, because that's just an amazing quote from the last person that you would expect to have that quote. Walk in your trap, take over your trap. So, as I said, we're 2-1. We missed the bet last week. We took the Bears on the road against the Cardinals. Cardinals won that game by a lot. And I, once again, don't really like any of the lines this week, but there's only one that I could really talk myself into. We're going to take the Steelers on the money line, who are 2.5-point underdogs on the road against the Commanders. Commanders have played a lot of bad defenses this year, right? The best defense they've played is the Bears, who have a good defense. Aside from that, though, They've played teams like the Giants and the Ravens who have really struggled on the defensive side of the ball. I think the Steelers are going to be a real challenge for rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels in this offense. Mike Tomlin, in his entire career in Pittsburgh, has done nothing but go at least 500 every year and put out good defenses. Okay, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, these guys, like this is going to be the best defense the Commanders have faced all year by far. The Steelers are also coming off a bye week, so they'll be very well prepared. Ever since Russell Wilson has taken over as the starter, that Steelers offense has also improved, right? They bring in Mike Williams as well. They just made that trade. So I don't love the bet, but we're going to take the Steelers on the money line, road underdog this week against the Commanders for our Kirk Cousins bet of the week. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, Tony East of Locked On Pacers, he's going to join us. We're going to talk just the Pacer season as a whole, the Eastern Conference, and of course, we're going to look ahead to tonight's game when they take on Charlotte and Sunday when they host the Knicks. Tony East, when we come back here in 4 minutes.
Unadulterated sports talk with unfiltered takes. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Tickets. A lot of football going on this weekend, but we also have Pacers basketball who just got back to 4-4. They're back to 500. Tony East, who covers both the Pacers and the Fever. He's also the host of Locked On Pacers. He joins the show. Tony, what's going on, man?
I can't believe that the 4-4 mark is good enough for third in the East. It's been a strange NBA season.
It really has. I mean, you got Joel Embiid pushing reporters, like you said, 4-4 in the East. The Cavaliers are 8-0. The Celtics are 7-2. The Eastern Conference as a whole is just, it's really weird. Like the Bucks are bad and they're not doing the whole load management thing. Why do you think the Eastern Conference has been so weird to start the year?
I think I saw this yesterday, and there were games last night, so I think this is a little off now. I would want to beat the Jazz, but I think going into yesterday, the East was 10-26 against the West.
Oh, wow.
So it's just, it's so crazy how that skews the records, and then everybody in the East is just beating up on themselves. So it's not surprising that the standings look the way they do, but like the Nets and the Pacers are third and fourth at 500. And I don't think that the East will end up that bad, but you know, bad starts for the Bucks and the Sixers and the West looking all pretty good. All of a sudden it's like, man, what is going on in the league? It's so peculiar how different the conferences look right now.
It really is. But hey, I mean, I don't know if the East ends up being really bad and the Pacers are the 3 seed. I wouldn't mind that. I mean, whatever it takes for them to have a home playoff series.
Yeah, they could benefit a lot too, and that was supposed to be the point of continuity, right? That they could get ahead early in the season. They haven't played very well, which I think maybe they feel good about that they've played kind of bad and they're somehow still 4-4. But at the same time, I think some of these other teams should click pretty soon too. So outside of the Cavs, I think everybody in kind of their expected range of finishing hasn't played well either. So it's just kind of goofy how all these teams that everybody thought would be pretty good have been decidedly not very good at all, or in the Sixers case, just can't even feel the team that looks any good.
Yeah, the Sixers thing is kind of understandable. I think the weirdest thing is the Bucks being 1-6 or 1-7 or whatever they are now. Outside of the fact that they're just really old, that's always the first thing I notice with their roster. Why do you think they've been so bad to start the year?
Yeah, they won last night, which got them out of the worst record in the NBA. It's just crazy. And I get that like they haven't had Chris Middleton. Like he's good, I get it, but the thing that stands out is kind of what you said is their age-mates are so unathletic, right? Like a big change they made last night that is never going away because of how it worked. Andre Jackson started instead of Gary Trent. They signed Gary Trent this offseason, and I thought that was a great addition for them. Like to be able to afford him in their situation was a miracle. He can kind of defend it and shoot. Like they need anyone who can do that. And 7 games into their season, they're like, nah, just kidding. We're going to start our second round pick from last year because we need any athleticism and speed on this team. And every time he's in there, things look a lot better. And lo and behold, I mean, they didn't have a great first half, but in the second half, they really took off and got a W. They need any sort of pop. Like Pat Connaughton doesn't have that sort of speed and athleticism anymore. Bobby Portis doesn't either. Giannis does, and I've asked somebody, like, who is the second most athletic player on the team? It's Andre Jackson. So that's how they get back to looking a little more threatening and dynamic, and they needed to do it, but they're so static a lot of the times because they don't have a lot of athleticism on the team, and that's why they started so bad despite being mostly healthy, just besides Chris Middleton, which is a big deal.
Yeah, joined by Tony East, host of Locked On Pacers. He also writes about the Fever and the Pacers as well. So with the 76ers, I want to run a theory by you, okay?
Okay. Yep.
I think Tyrese Maxey getting hurt is Joel Embiid's fault. So, you know, he's been doing the load management thing all year. He hasn't played in a single game. And because of that, Tyrese Maxey's having to do a lot more whenever he plays. And so I think you can make an argument if you really wanted to upset some Philly fans that Tyrese Maxey getting hurt is really Joel Embiid's fault because he hasn't played at all.
Yeah, and it is a muscle injury, right? Like, I think someone could say that. And, you know, when the Pacers went through that era of whatever you want to call it, when they had a bunch of injury-prone players, and they were all out at the same time for a long time with, you know, Brogdon, Oladipo, Warren, LeVert. Like, I kind of felt the same then when one guy would get hurt, so someone else had to play more minutes, and so he would get hurt, and it just kept snowballing. Like, that is a real thing. You know, Maxey played a bajillion minutes in that overtime when they had against the Pacers, which is still the Pacers' worst outing of the season to be by far. So I suppose that's a possible way of looking at it. And now they still, like, the first time that their big three all plays together is going to be Thanksgiving, like maybe December. It's remarkable how much the season has already kind of derailed. And yeah, maybe they can catch up because, like we said, the East sucks. But everything that has gone wrong for them has been really, really bad.
It really has, and I find it funny because I don't like Philly. I don't like Joel Embiid. I feel like you should play basketball if you can, but I don't know. I guess I'm wrong because no one really does that anymore unless you play for the Pacers, another team that's not doing the load management stuff and has started off way better than I think anyone thought is Cleveland. Why do you think they're so much better? Is it Evan Mobley's just awesome now because he is? Is it the new coach? Is it a mixture of both? Why do you think that the Cavs are so much better?
Yeah, Mobley's better. That's a big part of it. I mean, he has always been an amazing defender, but now that he is pretty useful on offense, they've been sticking him at the free throw line or the elbows and letting him kind of get touches and distribute and make plays from there. He's finishing possessions from there, not like just shooting jumpers, but just making plays that are effective for the offense. Like, that's helped because they don't just look so like clunky and in each other's way, which they didn't really look that way last year. They just don't at all this year. To me, the biggest thing that's made the Cavs way better, though, is definitely Darius Garland, who looks like all-star Darius Garland again. I mean, he's shooting a bunch of threes and making them. He had this – I can't believe this didn't, like, go viral at all. He had the best fake pass of the season by far. No one even knows about it, where he, like, careened his hand over the ball while sprinting full speed in transition, and a defender jumped to the passing lane, and he just dribbled to the basket. So last year he had this jaw injury, which sounds like it shouldn't matter for, like, performance, but apparently a jaw injury can really mess with your grip strength, and apparently that was the case for him. He looks terrific, and so now when Mitchell's off the floor, they still have a really good ball handler on the court who can shoot and distribute and make their offense go crazy. So they just have 48 minutes of, like, awesome offense. They're one of only two teams that are top five at both offense and defense. So Mobley's a big part of it, and Kenny Atkinson deserves credit for that. But I think healthy Garland, looking like the guy we saw 3 years ago, when he was an all-star, has been just as important. I mean, they have a great lineup on the floor for 48 minutes.
They do. I love Jared Allen. Like, he's one of my favorite guys to watch because there is no business decision ever made. He's blocking or going to try to block absolutely everything, and a lot of times he does. They're just a lot of fun to watch in general. Joined by Tony East, host of Locked On Pacers, and he's also a beat writer for the Fever and the Pacers as well. Moving on to the Pacers now. Speaking of someone who appears to have gotten a lot better, Jarris Walker played awesome against Orlando the other night. Made me feel great. I really liked him coming out of Houston. It was nice to see him have a game that felt like he really had a major impact on, not just on offense, hitting all of his shots, but also on defense as well. He's guarding Franz Wagner. What'd you think on his performance the other night?
Yeah, that's what you're not going to go 7 for 7 every game, but that's kind of the hope of what the Jarris Walker framework would be when you draft a guy like that, right? Is that he can defend in some ways and be good enough on offense that if his defense is really good, you have a super valuable player. And it's funny because he thought his defense was pretty rough, but I like you thought he defended Franz pretty well. Like, he had 2 steals and a block, I think. He made plays on that end of the floor. And of course, every game's going to cost him when you don't miss, but he's had pretty good offensive games all season in terms of moving the ball, making the right decisions. He's shooting close to 40% from 3. I mean, the whole package that night. And the threes are, of course, very important for his development from the corners. He's been really good this season, but he hit one above the break. When he had a floater, he was, like, making plays in the lane. And something Rick Carlisle talked about after the game is, he's been billed, and I've talked about this a lot, as a passer a lot. He played point guard in high school, which is probably overblown, but still matters. And, like, handled the ball and distributed a little bit at Houston. So there's this thought that, like, okay, if he can't shoot, at least he'll be able to pass and be an impactful offensive player. But it's hard to be a very plus passer in the NBA if you can't shoot, because guys will just sag off and clog up the paint and make it difficult. So when he does make all his shots, he looks like a great passer too. And that was happening too. So the whole package of what Jarris Walker can be in his 41st game on Wednesday, he's got to, like every young player, put together consistency and do that over and over. I thought he was better on defense Monday, defending Luka against the Mavs, ironically, than he was on Wednesday. So he's putting stuff together, and they need it because right now Neesmith's out, and of course having defensive wings is valuable, but he looks really good this year.
He does. I think the thing that I've noticed the most just from last year to this year, he just looks so much more comfortable. Like, I feel like he makes decisions a lot quicker? Because I think that there's an adjustment for any guy. Like, I'm sure Jarris Walker has been the best player on every team he's ever played for. And now, like, he's playing off the ball a lot. He doesn't have the ball as much. And I just think it takes those guys a year, really, to kind of get used to playing off the ball. Are you noticing the quicker decisions that he's making?
Yeah, that's sort of a Ben Mathurin thing too. But with Jarris, I think how it's gone, at least what I've noticed, is like last year he'd start games pretty engaged and do well, and then he'd mess up once. It was like he'd miss a read on offense or throw a lazy pass, whatever, and they'd start to overthink stuff, right? Which I get, as a rookie. And the other guy that got drafted in the first round last year, Ben Shepherd, like never messed up, right? That was what made him so effective. So this year, when he messes up, doesn't matter, right? He's going to keep playing his game and look comfortable and fit in, and that is a big part of growth, is just moving on to the next play, but not being able to, the game is slowing down, and you can still process it and not start overthinking why you messed up or how you can avoid it on the next play. And so that's why I think he's looked so effective. And of course, on Wednesday, he didn't really mess up like ever, right? I don't think he had a turnover either.
No.
So that helps a lot. But yeah, that's what I think has made him look way more comfortable this year.
Joined by Tony East, host of Locked On Pacers. Follow him on Twitter at Tony R. East. You brought up Ben Shepherd. I'm glad you did. That guy just has decided he's never going to miss again. I mean, he's just been incredible to start the year, obviously he's a good shooter, and, we saw that last year, but he's been really good to start the year. But so has Mathurin. What do you kind of think? I feel like roles are about to shift a little bit because he's so good at just getting downhill and scoring the basketball. Why do you think he's been so good to start the year?
His efficiency in the lane has been so impressive, and that is a big change for him because, and I talked about this probably with you. I mean, everybody really talked about it this summer, but like if he was gonna play more this year or play with the starters more or whatever, you envisioned his role changing into, and I mean you like general person, you, not you, Jonathan, but was like, if he's going to play more, it's going to be because he fits better with the starters, right? He fits better with Siakam or Halliburton or whatever. And we all thought that would be, okay, he's shooting better from three. He's more efficient. He can space and make those lineups click. He's more efficient this year with like a very similar level of outside shooting because he's been so good in the lane. And that still made him fit really well with those groups, even though it's a little different level of how he's fitting because they've played a little slower this year. I don't know if they want to, but that's just kind of how it's gone. And that really helps him because he can just break down the defense and get into the lane and make a defense rotate. And he makes the simple pass when he's cut off in ways that he didn't before, but he's still this awesome finisher who can take 14 free throws in one game. That's crazy, right? Like, so that makes him efficient too. I think I saw he's the third pacer ever with 20 points on only 3 made shots in a game, which happened on Wednesday. So the efficiency's been there. I think he's been a little better on defense, especially after that Celtics game. Basically, since then, he's looked really good on that end of the floor. I mean, we'll see what they decide lineup-wise when Nesmith is back, but if he keeps being efficient on offense and being a positive defender, I mean, you might just keep starting Ben Mathurin and figure out your lineup from there because he's been that good.
He has been. He's been awesome. So Halliburton, these last 2 games, against Dallas, he goes for 25 and 12. Didn't shoot it great from 3, but 25 and 12. I'm not going to complain. And then against the Magic, I think that if you just look at the box score, you're like, okay, Halliburton had an okay night. I thought he was really good. I feel like he's been a lot better effort-wise on defense. Against the Magic, he only had 17, but he scored 10 points in the fourth quarter, really kind of shut the door on the Magic. Why do you think he's been better in these last 2 games?
Yeah, a couple of things there. One is that he's been more like the balance of what he's doing with his drives has been a lot better. Last Friday they played New Orleans, and I think he took 8 shots in that game, which was his lowest total of the season, and 7 of them were threes. And he was driving a lot that game, like he would get into the defensive, teeth, and then he'd just kick it out a lot. And like he's a smart passer. I think everybody should trust that he's making a smart decision when he does that kind of stuff. But at some point, he's just got to look at the rim, and he didn't that night enough. And then against Dallas, his best game of the season, he was 8 for 8 on twos. He took 8 twos that night. He took 8 shots total against New Orleans. So what I think's kind of picked up really since the first time they played the Magic, I noticed this, but has even gotten better these last 2 games, which is what we're talking about, is that decision making in the lane, the balance of when to set up his others and when to get off his own shot, because he is really efficient inside there. Even though this year his three ball has been, useless, right? He's making basically 1/4 of them. When he's in the lane, he's still a good finisher. He still has a good 2-point percentage, and that's what makes him have these efficient nights. Like, I think he had 17 points on 11 shots against the Magic. So as he's still working through, his very inefficient start, he's still really good in the clutch all year, right? He hit a huge shot in 5 of their 8 games. He was the closer against the Magic, and when he plays well in the lane and makes the smart decisions there, that's when he makes the defense really panic and rotate and have to defend in different ways, and he's been doing that a lot recently. So that's what I think the big change for him has been. So obviously he hasn't been nearly as effective as he wants or as good as he was last year, not even close. But if he keeps hitting clutch shots and making the right plays, I think the Pacers will be fine with it. They've survived so far.
Joined by Tony East of Locked On Pacers. Follow him on Twitter at TonyREast. He also writes and covers the Fever and the Pacers as well. Last question for you, Tony, and I will let you go. I've been thinking about Halliburton and the slow start to the year, and just looking at the Pacers roster with, Siakam, who's, awesome, and Mathurin, who's really emerged, and Nembhard, who emerged in the playoffs last year. I don't feel like Halliburton has the ball as much as he did last year. Do you feel the same way? And do you think that could potentially be a reason for why he's gotten off to such a slow start?
I really felt that way early in the year. Like in the preseason, they were really trying to, I wouldn't call it like be a 3-headed monster necessarily. That implies they were, it was evenly shared. But I felt like they're playing through Nembhard and Siakam as initiators a lot more than they did last year. And that really happened opening night too against Detroit. It was like really balanced. And, they've gone, I think, back to the right amount of Tyrese Halliburton lead initiator since then, really. But there is some more effort. And like we've seen games where Siakam is their lead assist guy of the starters, or Nembhard is getting in the teeth quite a bit, even though he hasn't been, super effective offensively to start the season. And they've kind of wiggled back to the right balance of who should have the ball and how much with that opening 5. But I think that could be part of it, is that they have so many players and so many guys with mouths to feed that can handle the ball, and not as much anymore because they have so many injuries, that it did kind of affect him in a way. And I don't know that that's why he was shooting so bad, was like a rhythm thing or anything, because he still isn't shooting well at all. Although I think 2 of his last 3 or 3 of his last 4 games, he's had a pretty good 3-point percentage. It hasn't looked the same for whatever reason. And that balance kind of looked like it was going to work early in the year, but it was a Hawks preseason game and a Pistons game. Like, I don't want to overthink those 2 opponents in those 2 games, but there was just a little different kind of way the usage was going. And I wonder how much they had to, for lack of a better term, work through with that balance and how much that impacted Halliburton. But I think they're getting back to what I would consider the right amount of usage for all those guys, which involves Tyrese Halliburton having the ball quite a bit because he is by far the guy defenses care the most about.
Yeah, he's really. Are you concerned at all? How many games does he have to shoot poorly for you to be like, okay, this is like a legitimate thing to be worried about?
Well, last year, that mid-March stretch where he was just god-awful from 3 was like 12 games or something. We're getting close to 12, I guess. We're at 8. And after that, he got out of it, right? So I don't really know. I think 15 is probably the number because that would be longer than last year. And 15 is, you're sniffing 1/5 of the season at that point, which is pretty rough. But we've seen him. I mean, it's the start of the season, which is why it's a bigger question, because you wonder, like, is this going to be the whole season? Which is not the case when it's happening in March. But maybe this is just his slump from last year happening right at the beginning of the season. It's hard to say, even though it happened in March and it's happening again. So it feels different. It's like more of a pattern than it felt like last time. But I think he'll get out of it eventually. But the sooner the better, right? Because it hasn't looked like last year for him yet.
It hasn't. Look, he's a career 40% 3-point shooter. I have no worries, but I think you're right. If it gets to 15, then there's some legit reasons to be concerned. Tony, thanks for your time, man. As always, have a good time tonight watching him play Charlotte, and have a good time on Sunday watching him play the Knicks.
You got it. Thanks for having me, man.
See ya. That is Tony East. Follow him on Twitter at TonyREast. Check out his podcast, Locked On Pacers. He does a great job over there. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, Saturday, Indiana, 3:30 on CBS. They're going to take on Michigan. I've got a lot of thoughts on that game. Can't wait for it because I can't stand Michigan, and I really like IU in this one. So I'll give you my thoughts on that game when we come back here in 4 minutes.
More winners, more often. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? The real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thanks again to Tony East for coming on the show and talking a little Pacers. Head over to YouTube, subscribe to Indy Sports Ticket, hop in the chat, watch the live stream over there. We got people talking about tailgating the Indiana game on Saturday. Indiana taking on Michigan. The game starts at 3:30. And to put it simply, this game just shouldn't be close. It shouldn't be. Indiana favored by 13.5, which is insane. I think before the year, if you said there's a 13.5 point line on Indiana versus Michigan, people would have thought that Michigan would be favored. That is obviously not the case. That lines up to 14.5 and so on some other sports gambling sites. So everyone believes that Indiana is going to just demolish Michigan. And I'm kind of in the same boat. Michigan really only does one thing well, and that's run the football. Okay, and this is a very talented team, right? If you go and you look at the recruiting classes, they're like top 15 every year since 2020, and a lot of that talent is stored up on the offensive line. Okay, they've got multiple good running backs. If you play college football 25, that Michigan guy on the cover, yeah, like that's one of their running backs. That dude's an absolute monster. And once again, that offensive line's really good. The issue for Michigan is that Indiana has one of the best front sevens in all of college football, and something tells me Michigan's not going to have Indiana signs this year. So that makes things a little bit tougher on them. So, and when it comes to Indiana, I mean, I've been saying it really since week 1. This front seven is just, it's nasty. I mean, they rush the quarterback incredibly well with the front four. They have the best run defense in the Big Ten. Okay, this is arguably, this front seven belongs alongside teams like Georgia and Texas. Like, that is how good this front seven is. I mean, show me another front seven that has limited a power 4 opponent to negative 1.1 yards per carry like Indiana did last week against Michigan State. There might be one, but there aren't very many of them. Okay, Indiana, they're not only allowing the second fewest points per game in the Big Ten, they're only giving up like 14 points a game. Like, just this defense has been incredibly dominant. But once again, like, this is the best run defense in the Big Ten. They're only giving up 72.5 rushing yards per game on the ground. They have simply dominated the line of scrimmage on defense, really on offense as well. This is a team that can really run the football, but they've just dominated the line of scrimmage all year. And that is why they've absolutely obliterated teams. I love watching the linebackers. They play downhill. Indiana's one of the best tackling teams in the country. I mean, like, they get their hands on you, whether it's a defensive back, linebacker, defensive lineman, and you're going down. And I can't wait to watch this matchup between this Michigan rushing attack that, once again, is very talented. They've ran the ball well. They've got multiple games this year where they've ran for like 300 yards on the ground. So, like, Michigan can really run the football. And obviously, as I alluded to, this Indiana front seven is one of the best in all of college football. And so I can't wait to see that matchup. I like Indiana in the matchup between, Michigan's ability to run the ball and Indiana's ability to stop the run. And that's not because Michigan isn't good. Like, they're clearly a good football team. They've lost, they're 5-4, but 3 of their 4 losses came to Oregon, the number 1 ranked team in the country, Texas, the number 5 ranked team in the country, and Illinois, who's bounced in and out of the top 25 all year. And then their 4th loss came on the road at Washington. We've seen multiple teams in the Big Ten struggle with the travel, whether that's from the Midwest out to the West Coast or West Coast teams traveling out to the Midwest. So every loss that Michigan has on their schedule, there's a reason for it. Okay, so Michigan is a good team. Obviously, not as good as last year, but they're still incredibly talented. That is at every spot except for quarterback. And that's why I think Indiana is going to be fine defending the run, because they don't have to worry about Michigan really throwing the football. They have the second worst passing offense in the Big Ten. The only team who throws the football worse is Iowa. Michigan's only throwing the ball for like 130 yards a game. That's like a middle school number. So, like, when you can't throw the football, it's just impossible to beat good teams. And no matter what you think of Indiana and their schedule and all that stuff that I feel like we've been talking about all week ever since the college football playoff rankings came out on Tuesday. It is evident that Indiana is one of the 10 best teams in all of college football. And if you can't throw the ball, you're not going to beat one of the 10 best teams in the country. And look, Michigan's switching quarterbacks again this year. It's week 11, and they're still trying to figure it out. If that doesn't tell you how bad the passing attack has been. I mean, teams like Northwestern, who's no good, and Purdue, who's worse than no good, like they throw the ball better than Michigan does. And once again, you aren't going to beat one of the best 10 teams in the country being one-dimensional, especially when you're playing against a defense as good as Indiana. Indiana wins this game by double digits. I don't know if they cover or not. I think it's going to be really close. I think they either win by somewhere between 10 and 17 points. The reason why I'm hesitant to take them, minus 13.5 or minus 14.5 is because Michigan's going to run the football a lot. They're going to chew the clock. And so I just don't know if Indiana's going to have enough time in the game to, go up by, 2 touchdowns or more. So I would stay away from betting this game. But if you did want to bet it, I guess you bet Indiana, because who wants to bet against their favorite team? Unless you're a Purdue fan, then bet Michigan the whole way. Other big games going on in college football. I am not a fan of the college football playoff. I think there's too many teams. Okay, usually this year's a little bit different, so which doesn't help my argument. But usually it's pretty clear cut who the 3 best teams in the country are, and then there's a pretty steep drop off. That's obviously not the case this year, but usually when you look at the history of college football, it's pretty evident who the 2 or 3 best teams are. But the one thing that this 12-team playoff has afforded us are these elimination games during the regular season. Okay, like we're having to pay way more attention to teams with 2 losses or 1 loss than we used to in only the 4-team era, where it's like, okay, it matters what Georgia does, it matters what Ohio State does, and it matters what Alabama does. Like for most or for all of really the college football playoff, when it was only 4 teams, that is what it was. But now, because there's 12 teams and there's at-large bids and all these things, there's just more teams to pay attention to. So there's more big games on Saturdays. There's 3 elimination games going on Saturday, or at least partial elimination games. Georgia plays at Ole Miss. Georgia obviously ranked number 3 in the country. I think they should be ranked number 2 because I just think that they're better than Ohio State, but they're ranked 3rd, so I'm not going to get super upset there. They're playing at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is ranked 16th. They have 2 losses on the year. If they win out, Ole Miss will get a spot in the college football playoff because they'll have a win over Georgia. I think they play a couple other ranked teams in there. But I don't think a 3-loss team is going to make the playoff, and a 3-loss team should not make the playoff. I don't care who you lose to. So big game for Ole Miss. This is an elimination game for them. Georgia obviously trying to beefing up that resume a little bit more as well. Colorado plays at Texas Tech. Texas Tech just upset Iowa State over the weekend. Iowa State was ranked in front of Indiana, dropped all the way down to 17th after that loss. Texas Tech, no sleeper there. They're 6-3. Colorado, they're 7-2. If they win out, they'll have a chance to win the Big 10 title, the Big 12 title. Obviously, if you win that, you get a first-round bye. And so, big game for Colorado at Texas Tech. If Texas Tech wins that one, Colorado will likely be eliminated from the college football playoff. And then at night, you have the elimination game of Saturday. Alabama, who's ranked 11th, goes on the road to LSU in Baton Rouge at night to play. And whoever loses this game, they'll fall to 3 losses on the year, and they're not going to make the playoff if they fall to 3 losses. And they shouldn't, because if you lose a quarter of your games, then you're probably not one of the 12 best teams in the country. This game is huge for both teams. If Kalen DeBoer misses the playoff his first year at Alabama, I mean, people in Tuscaloosa are already unhappy. I mean, it'll only get worse for him down there. Brian Kelly trying to escape this narrative of not being able to beat good teams. And so big game for him as well. They're obviously fighting to make the 12-team playoff because LSU and their fan base has major expectations for their football program as well. So that is the elimination game on Saturday. Can't wait to tune in and watch that one on Saturday. When we come back at 11 o'clock, top of the hour, I'm going to get you ready for Colts versus Bills. Zack Gray at ZG the Grapevine. He's set to join me at 11:40. He texted me last night. He's got some rant. He said it's a small rant, which isn't true. If you know Zach, there is no such thing as a small rant that he wants to give, and I'm going to let him do that. I have no idea what it's about, so that might be a bad choice, but I'm sure he'll be fine. So Zack Gray, he said to join me at 11:40, and when we come back here in about 5 minutes, we'll talk Colts versus Bills. There's also some college hoops going on over the weekend. Indiana plays Eastern Illinois Sunday. Purdue playing Northern Kentucky tonight. I'm going to touch on those games as well when we come back here in about 5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hope you guys are having a nice week. It is Friday. We got Colts football Sunday, IU football tomorrow, Purdue basketball tonight, Indiana basketball on Sunday. Just all the sports. It is truly the best time of the year. So, Colts taking on the Bills on Sunday. Joe Flacco and the Colts playing host to the third best team in the NFL. It's a big game for the Colts. Okay, like this is a team that clearly wants to make the playoffs, and they are currently out of the playoff picture. Okay, they're a game and a half back of the Los Angeles Chargers. They're a game back behind the Broncos. The Bengals are 4-6. They're kind of creeping up into the picture, and the Bengals are clearly a good football team. I don't know if you watched the game last night, but like that's a good team. You know, I'm not going to rip their defense because they couldn't stop the Ravens, because nobody can stop the Ravens now that Lamar Jackson is the quarterback. When Joe Flacco played quarterback for the Ravens, very, very easy to stop. And that's obviously who's now playing quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. And the Colts made it abundantly clear that the reason why they switched to Joe Flacco was so they could make the playoffs. That's what they said when they were making the switch. And it's just not a good look if you make the switch to Joe Flacco and then go 0-2, right? Because if you go 0-2, that means that you're 1-3 when Joe Flacco starts. Okay, and look, if you if you make that switch and you go 0-2, Colts fans are going to be upset, and they should be. Right. And I think that the Colts organization as a whole will feel kind of ridiculous. Right. Because they, Shane Steichen, they make him go up there and announce to the NFL world, they're like, we want to make the playoffs. So we're switching to Joe Flacco. We're going to bench Anthony Richardson. We want to win right now. And to stand up and to say that just to fall to 4-6. Like, not only will Colts fans be upset, and rightfully so, but I think the Colts will be laughed at by other teams and other fan bases around the league. Like, if you're going to put the development of Anthony Richardson on pause, then you better make it worth it. And to me, making the playoffs as the 7th seed and going 9-8, which is what the Colts are gunning for at this point, that doesn't feel worth it to me. But I don't know, when you haven't made the playoffs in 4 years, I kind of understand it. And after Sunday, I think it's going to be pretty tough for the Colts to make the playoffs because they're playing the Bills. Once again, one of the best teams in the NFL. The fact that the Bills are only favored by 3.5 points is simply absurd. Okay, and I'm a big what does Vegas think guy, because those guys out there in Vegas, those casinos aren't small, right? They're huge and they're luxurious because the people out in Vegas make a ton of money off of people not getting their bets right. And as weird as this line is, I'm going to trust my gut here. This game isn't going to be close. Like, if the Bills don't win by double digits, I will be surprised. They are so much better than the Colts are. They have the better coach. They have the better quarterback. The roster as a whole is better, right? The Colts don't have anyone who can defend Amari Cooper. I mean, I like Jalen Jones. When I did my midseason Colts awards on Tuesday, I gave him one because I like him as a player. The story's cool. 7th round pick. Now cornerback number 1 for the Colts, and he's held his own. But against the better receivers in the NFL, he's just struggled. If you don't believe me, go back and watch that Minnesota game again. Okay, the Bills also are more than just a Josh Allen dependent offense like they've been in years past. Since promoting Joe Brady to offensive coordinator and letting him, call plays last year, they've just been much more balanced. And this year, that is continuing to be the case. They throw the ball 29 times a game on average, and they run the ball 27 times a game on average. Okay, so the Colts have to stop both. And I just don't know if the Colts are going to be able to stop either. Okay, we know who Josh Allen is. We know what he's capable of. Second best quarterback in the NFL behind, Mahomes. They go out, they make the trade for Amari Cooper, who's still one of the better receivers in the NFL. Keon Coleman, he may not play Sunday, but if he does, he's having a really good year as a rookie. And then they've got Khalil Shakir in the slot, one of the better slot players in the NFL. Like they've got a ton of weapons on offense. And as well as the Bills throw the football, they run it just as well because James Cook is one of the better running backs in the NFL. They're averaging over 4 yards a carry this year. And they're going to find a lot of success against this Colts defense because, to be quite frank, everyone has found a lot of success against this Colts defense. There are only 3 teams in the NFL giving up more yards per game than the Colts are. Ken Sterling, who pops on for the Power Hour every Monday on the Dan Dockett Show from 2 to 3, he was asking questions at the Gus Bradley press conference earlier in the week, and Kent asked an outstanding question. He asked Colts defensive coordinator Gus Bradley his thoughts on the stat yards allowed per game. And Gus Bradley gave an interesting answer to that. Here is Colts defensive coordinator Gus Bradley talking about the yards per game stat and why it does and why it doesn't really matter.
I think that, we look at it because if we were giving up 350 yards a game, we would surely look at it. We would sit down and look at it and say, hey, what's the issue here? And so I think there is some importance to stats because you look at them to see if there's any issues that you need to get taken care of. And then I think that you have a determination to say, well, let's say they carried it 60 times for 180 yards. You'd say, well, 3 yards per carry. All right, but you look at it. So I'm not going to sit here and say you don't look at it. But I think ultimately, Kent, we look at points and we say, hey, where are we at in points per game? Because ultimately, as a coach and as a team, that's ultimately what you're concerned about. Do we give ourselves a chance to win? Do we put ourselves in position to win? But I do think you look at stats to see if there's an underlying problem. Maybe you're giving up a lot of points and you're giving up a lot of yards rushing and you see it. And, there's 2 things go hand in hand you're looking at and you're saying, well, it's pretty evident we need to make some changes. So to answer your question, I know it's a little long-winded. Yes, I do think you look at those things. But I think in the coach's world, ultimately you're looking at points and saying, hey, do we give ourselves a chance to win? And are we creating enough opportunities for our offense to win, or, to score?
Gus Bradley, Colts defensive coordinator, talking about the yards per game allowed or yards allowed per game stat, why it matters, why it doesn't matter. And, in that clip, he says, if you're giving up 350 yards a game, then you need to sit down, you need to look at it, and you need to figure out why. Well, Gus, Colts are giving up 380 yards per game. So clearly there is something wrong with this Colts defense. Now, to credit Gus Bradley, despite those issues and despite the insane amount of yardage that they've allowed this year, they're 12th in the NFL in points allowed per game. They have figured out a way to not give up points. And that answer for them has been to force turnovers. The Colts are incredibly turnover dependent on defense. Okay, that they're forcing, just under 2 turnovers per game. And that's a good thing, because you can set your offense up with good field position. And obviously whenever you force a turnover, you also get a stop. But being a turnover dependent defense is not a good thing. Being a turnover dependent defense is like taking a job with a low salary but high and infrequent bonuses. Okay, the week-to-week paycheck isn't enough to live on. It's not enough to pay your light bill and to pay the mortgage and do all those things. But when that bonus shows up, it allows you to pay bills and keep your house. That's a terrible way to live because sometimes that bonus doesn't show up. And in the Colts case, they have 1 game this year where they didn't force a turnover. Week 1 against the Houston Texans. They gave up 29 points in that game, right? That's the 1 game where they didn't force a turnover. The Colts are 1-3 in games where they don't force at least 2 turnovers. That's an issue. That points to the defense being bad. The Colts don't get off the field on 3rd down. They have the 24th ranked 3rd down defense in the NFL, and they don't really get stops in the red zone either. Right, the Colts give up a touchdown in the red zone 58% of the time, and those 2 stats, 3 stats really, when you count the yardage, point to the Colts having a bad defense. The only reason the Colts have kept teams out of the end zone and they've gotten stops this year, the only way that they've really been able to do it is to force turnovers. They're 7th in the NFL in takeaways per game, averaging just under 2 takeaways per game. And that's a good thing, right? Forcing turnovers, those can swing games and all those things. But They're playing the Bills on Sunday, and the Bills don't turn the football over. Okay, they're second in the NFL, the Bills are, in giveaways per game. They're averaging less than half a turnover per game. And look, when you play this Colts defense, we saw it in week 1. If you don't turn the ball over, you're going to score a lot of points. And the Colts offense just doesn't have the firepower to keep up with them. Plus, the Bills have a good defense. They're 8th in points allowed per game, 17th in yards allowed per game, and they have the 7th best red zone defense in the NFL. Okay, so teams can kind of move the football on them, but they don't give up points, and it's because their red zone defense is, one of the 10 best in the NFL. But this is the NFL. Everyone's getting paid. Okay, as hard a time as I give the Colts and Joe Flacco, they have won 4 games, and so there is a path to victory for the Colts. There is a way for them to beat this team that has a better quarterback and a better coach and a better roster and all of those things. And that way is for Jonathan Taylor to have a monster game. Okay, he's the best player on this Colts offense. Okay, and it's very possible for him to have a big game against the Bills on Sunday because the Bills can struggle at times to defend the run. Matt Milano not playing. He hadn't played a game at all this year. I believe he tore his bicep before the year started. He's set to come back here at some point, but not this week. And because he hasn't been there, the Bills against the run just haven't been very good. They're giving up 4.8 yards per carry. That's 26th in the NFL. And obviously, Jonathan Taylor's a guy who's had a lot of success in his career. The Colts paid him a lot of money last year. So, this is one of the games where he really needs to show up. The issue is Joe Flacco. Right? He is the issue. If Jonathan Taylor came out and he averaged 4.5 yards a carry, then the Colts are going to be fine. But Joe Flacco's playing. And as we all know, or if you listen to my show, as you know, because I feel like I bring this up every day, the Colts really struggle to run the football when Joe Flacco's in. Okay, the Colts average 3.7 yards per carry when Joe Flacco was playing quarterback as opposed to over 5 yards a carry when Anthony Richardson is playing quarterback. Okay, and this is one of those games where Jonathan Taylor has to have success. Okay, because Joe Flacco on 3rd and 4, outstanding. Trust Joe Flacco on 3rd and 4, no doubt. But 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, sorry, no faith in Joe Flacco whatsoever to move the sticks in that spot. Okay, but 3rd and short, Joe Flacco's got it all day. He can hit Josh Downs on that, 5-yard slant route that everyone wants for him to throw so badly. I don't know why. I'm more of a fan of the Anthony Richardson 60-yard bombs that lead to touchdowns. But hey, if you want 5-yard slants to Josh Downs that lead to 0 red zone trips and 0 offensive touchdowns like we saw on Sunday Night Football, then that's good for you. So Jonathan Taylor got to get going on the ground this week. The Bills are better than the Colts. And Jonathan Taylor is the one guy on this team that I feel like can really kind of lift the Colts up. Okay. And look, even if he does, I don't even know if that's going to be enough. The Bills are just simply way better than the Colts are. They don't turn the ball over, and the Colts need turnovers to stay in games. Okay. The Bills haven't turned it over this year. I think this is just a bad matchup for the Colts. I like the Bills to win 34-21. This is going to be the first game of the year that the Colts lose by more than 1 possession. That is my official prediction. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, I'm going to talk a little hoops, college basketball back in full swing. Got some big games tonight, big games tomorrow. My Arkansas Razorbacks, they're playing Baylor. That'll be fun to watch, but Purdue, they're in action tonight, taking on Northern Kentucky, and Indiana, plays Eastern Illinois on Sunday. I'm going to get you ready for those games when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
Texting enrolls you into recurring automated text messages. Consent not required to purchase. Message and data rates may apply.
Hey, Dan, how you doing? Haven't seen you around the gym for a while.
Yeah, I've really fallen off. Since I turned 40, I just don't get the results I used to get.
Often imitated, never duplicated. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hopefully you've had a nice week. Thanks for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's on the Indy Sports Ticket app, which you can download wherever you get your apps. Maybe you're watching on Twitter. Follow me there at __ Jonathan Smith. Maybe you're watching on YouTube, Indy's Sports Ticket. If you want to head over there, subscribe, watch the stream there, comment in the chat, do all those things. Maybe you're just listening in the car on 1430 AM. Indiana, they're not only playing football Saturday, they're playing basketball Sunday. Purdue, they're playing Northern Kentucky tonight. I feel kind of bad for Purdue fans. I haven't talked about them in forever because their football team's awful. And so I felt like I had to take a couple minutes to talk about the only thing that Purdue's good at, and that's basketball. They're playing Northern Kentucky tonight, and I only really have one thing that I'm looking for. Because if you watched Purdue's first game against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, game was close there. They pull away late. Braden Smith, did Braden Smith things, and, he closed the game out really well, had a bunch of assists, scored some points. He was good for the most part. The issue were the turnovers. Can Purdue cut down the turnovers? They had 16 against Texas A&M Corpus Christi. As good as Braden Smith was, your starting point guard can't turn the basketball over 6 times. Like that can't happen, especially when they're a junior and they've been starting for the last 2 years. He has to be better at just controlling the offense, controlling the pace, and just not turning the basketball over. So that's the biggest thing. Can they clean that up? Because 16 turnovers, like if you do that in the Big Ten, if you do that really against any Power 4 team, they're probably going to beat you. So they have to clean that part of their offense up. I thought defensively against A&M Corpus Christi, I thought they were fine. The other thing I want to see is what do they do when they can't, when they aren't shooting the ball well, right? They've got multiple big guys. They're going to try and replace Zach Edey by committee, which is fine because Zach Edey was amazing. He's off to a halfway decent start with the Grizzlies as well. So what are they going to do when they aren't shooting 40% from 3? Because that's what they did, earlier when they played against Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So how do they turn the ball over, and what do they do on offense when they aren't knocking down a bunch of threes? That's kind of the thing that I want to see. Northern Kentucky is a team that usually traditionally competes to win their league, so could be a relatively tough test for Purdue. For Indiana, they're playing on Sunday against Eastern Illinois. The question for me when it comes to Indiana is, do they rebound? They should rebound because they're huge. Their starting center's 7 foot, their power forward's 6'9", and their small forward's 6'9". I mean, like, this is going to be one of the biggest teams in the Big Ten this year. Like, that front line, it's nothing but size, right? Tall dudes with really long arms, right? Like, you go out into the portal, you get Omar Ballo. Like, that's a guy who should rebound the crap out of the ball. Malik Renew should rebound the ball well. And then my guy, Mackenzie Mbako, he was the only guy who rebounded against SIEU, a few nights ago. And the fact that they gave up 16 offensive rebounds to a team that was way smaller than them, like, shouldn't have happened. That to me is just an effort thing. So is the effort for IU going to be there on Sunday when they play against Eastern Illinois? Little tune-up game before they take on South Carolina. That I believe is their third game of the year. So do they rebound? Because they should, because they're huge. And do they avoid turnovers? They also committed 16 turnovers against SIUE. That's 32 extra possessions that they gave to what was a bad team between offensive rebounds and turnovers. Like, if you play against anyone that's average, like, you're not going to win that game. So hopefully Mike Woodson in Indiana can clean those things up as we get the college basketball season underway. But it's a really weird time for Indiana fans, because as of right now, they'd be done with football. They'd be like, the Colts are bad. Indiana football's terrible. We're ready for college basketball. But that's not the case this year. The Colts are bad, yes, but the Indiana Hoosiers, like, that is clearly one of the 10 best teams in the country, right? And they're playing host to Michigan tomorrow in Bloomington. They're on at 3:30. They're on CBS, so make sure you watch that game. Indiana favored by 13.5, which is pretty insane. Up to 14.5 on some other sports gambling sites. Zack Gray, professional sports gambler, he's set to join me here in about 15 minutes. We're going to talk gambling, some picks he likes, and some picks that he doesn't like, because we seem to never agree on anything, which is good. That's not a bad thing. And so Indiana, however, they're going to crush Michigan. Like, this game shouldn't be close. Hey, the one thing that Michigan does well is run the football. And they should. They're talented up front, multiple good offensive linemen, multiple good running backs. I mean, this Michigan team can run the football. Okay. The issue for Michigan is Indiana has one of the best front sevens in all of college football. I think that is the best part of this Indiana team. Like, they stuff the run. They control the line of scrimmage. Show me another team in all of college football that has held another Power 4 opponent to negative 1.1 yards per carry like Indiana did last week against Michigan State. There might be a couple others. Maybe Georgia did it to somebody who's bad. Maybe Texas did it. I don't know. But there aren't very many who have done that. Okay, and Indiana isn't only allowing the second fewest amount of points per game, giving up, around 2 touchdowns a game, but they also have the best run defense in the Big Ten. They're only allowing 72.5 yards per game on the ground. They have dominated the line of scrimmage all year on defense. Like, they have, like, their defensive tackles, they do a good job run filling, and the edges do a great job or defensive ends do a good job of setting the edge. I mean, this team just, when it comes to run defense, it doesn't get much better. And then you have linebackers who are fast. They play downhill. And this is also one of the best tackling teams in the country. I mean, like, watch tomorrow. Like, when Indiana gets their hands on you, like, you're going down. Right. So I can't wait to watch this Michigan rushing attack take on this tough Indiana front seven. I think Michigan's really going to struggle to run the football. And when Michigan can't run the football, they can't score. Like, that's just the reality of who Michigan is. And I think that when people look at Michigan and they see that they're 5-4, there's this immediate assumption that they're just awful and that they're bad. And I disagree. Like, I think Michigan's a little better than people realize. When you look at their schedule and you look at who they've lost to and where they've lost, like their schedule hasn't been easy. They lost to Oregon. That's the number 1 ranked team in college football. They lost to Texas. That's the number 5 ranked team in college football. They lost to Illinois, who has bounced in and out of the top 25 all year. Their 4th loss came on the road at Washington, and we've seen just about every team in the Big Ten struggle with the travel, right? Like teams in the Midwest going out to USC or UCLA or Washington or Oregon, like they've struggled traveling out there and playing well. And we've seen the inverse with teams in, Oregon and California traveling out to the Midwest or all the way out to Rutgers. Like they've struggled because playing in a different time zone is just weird and it's just different. It's difficult. So I don't really hold that Michigan loss to Washington against them too heavily. But obviously they aren't as good as they were last year. And I think that's part of why people are down on them, because you see them win a national title to being 5-4 and not even ranked. But they're talented at every spot except for the most important position on the field, and that is quarterback. And that's why they will lose to Indiana. It's nearly impossible to beat good teams if you don't have a good quarterback. Okay, Michigan is switching quarterbacks once again. It's week 11, and they still don't even know who they like at quarterback, which is obviously problematic. And then you have Indiana, who's the total opposite. Curtis Rourke, an absolute stud, a guy who could potentially get an invite to New York for the Heisman, depending on how he plays, this week against Michigan and in 2 weeks against Ohio State, because they've got that bye week there in between games. If he pops out, has a couple big games against big name brand opponents, then we'll see how it goes. Also, that Indiana-Michigan line went up even more. It's now 15.5 in some places. I mean, it's just skyrocketed. Jeez. Anyway, when it comes to Indiana, like they're just so much better at quarterback. There's it's just that's why Indiana's going to win, because Curtis Rourke is significantly better than whoever Michigan decides to run out there at quarterback. He runs the offense incredibly well. That's why he's completing almost 75% of his passes on the season. And he's a large part of why Indiana averages 48 points a game on the season. And I know that there's some Indiana haters out there like, oh, well, they haven't played anybody. 48 points in college football is a ton, no matter who you play. And they've beaten the brakes off of everyone that they have played. And I think that that's going to continue this week. Indiana is going to win by double digits. Okay, but I don't know if they cover. Michigan's going to chew the clock. They're going to try and shorten the game. We know that they're going to run the football. They're going to huddle. They're going to do all those things. The clock is going to be running a lot in this game. So with Michigan, with how much they run the football, I think they're a turnover away. If Indiana turns the football over once, something that they haven't done since they played Maryland in week 3. That's actually the only game this year that Indiana's turned the ball over at all, which is pretty insane. But if Michigan forces a turnover and they're able to take 5 or 6 extra minutes off the clock on that possession, then I think there's a real world where Indiana doesn't cover that 14.5, 15.5 point spread wherever you do your gambling at. So once again, we're going to get Zack Gray's opinion on that game coming up here in about 10 minutes when we talk, sports gambling just for the upcoming weekend. So I wouldn't bet on this game. I think that the line's just simply way too high. It's just way too high. Indiana wins pretty handily, but Michigan covers whatever that spread winds up being. That's obviously not the only big game going on this weekend. We've got college football playoff elimination games, some big NFL games as well. Georgia at Ole Miss. That's an elimination game for Ole Miss. They've got 2 losses on the year. They're fighting to potentially make the playoff. If they beat Georgia, they'll have a great case to make the playoff, even though they lost to Kentucky, who's not very good. But I say that if Notre Dame can lose to Northern Illinois and still get in, then Ole Miss should probably still get in if they lose to Kentucky. Colorado at Texas Tech. This is an elimination game for Colorado. They still have, I know they're ranked 20th, but they still have a chance to win the Big 12, which they can do. They've got arguably, the 2 best players in all of college football between Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, who's been the best quarterback in college football this year. Texas Tech, that is not an easy opponent. We saw them upset Iowa State, just last week. And so that game, that's a big one for Colorado. Alabama versus LSU. That is the elimination game. Alabama, LSU, both with 2 losses. Whoever loses isn't going to make the playoff. I mean, it's really that simple. I know Alabama's got that big win over Georgia. That's arguably the best win in the country. I would argue it's probably Georgia going on the road and beating Texas, but just because of that road element. But 9-3 with the win over Georgia, a lot of things would have to break Alabama's way, and it's Alabama, so they probably would break Alabama's way. That's usually just the way that it goes. But big game, not just for those teams, but for those coaches. Brian Kelly's been in Baton Rouge for a few years now. And he hasn't really done anything, haven't made a college football playoff. It expanded this year. I think the expectation down there in Baton Rouge is to make the playoff and win a playoff game. I think that is the expectation. And they lose to Alabama, they won't meet that expectation. And for Alabama, the standard is, or the expectation is always to play for and win a national championship game. And look, Alabama's probably not going to do that this year. I think that Kalen DeBoer is one of the better coaches in the country. The guy's only lost 6 games as a head coach in his entire college coaching career. So I'm not going to write them off quite yet. We know how talented they are with Jalen Milroe and the weapons they have on offense. They've just got to figure out the defensive side of the ball. But that is a huge elimination game for both of those teams. NFL, obviously Bills, Colts, that's big. Colts need to win that game to keep their playoff hopes alive. Broncos play the Chiefs. Broncos trying to grab that final wild card spot like the Colts are. 49ers play the Falcons this week. They're 4-4. Christian McCaffrey's back. 49ers trying to finagle their way back into the playoffs, so they need to beat the Falcons. That's a good team, by the way. And then the Steelers play the Commanders, which is our Kirk Cousins bet of the week this week. We got the Steelers on the money line on the road. They're 2.5-point dogs to beat the Commanders. Those are the 2 teams at the top of the NFC. Should be a fun game with a nice little clashing of styles. And, of course, Sunday Night Football, Lions, Texans, 2 of the better teams in the NFL. Doesn't look like Nico Collins is going to be back for the Texans quite yet. So maybe they lose, Colts win, and then we feel a little different about the division. We'll see. But when we come back here in about 4 minutes, Zack Gray, ZG the Grapevine on Twitter, professional sports gambler. He's going to join the show. And we're going to have a lot of fun because it's always fun when Zach comes on, and he'll join the show to give you some bets here in about 4 minutes.
Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thanks for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in. It is the best segment of the week. Zack Gray, @ZG the Grapevine on Twitter, joining the show to give you nothing but winning bets, because that's all that Zack gives us. Zack, what's going on, man?
Jay Smith, it's a pleasure to be with you again on a Friday.
Dude, this is, like I said, this is the best way to end the week. I know that the bets are going to hit. I get to poke fun at you. You get to poke fun at me. It's really great. So
yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to fire up something today. I'm going to fire up someone with this rant.
Okay.
We'll get to it, but yeah.
So let's really quickly. I know you said you don't have an NFL bet quite yet this week, but you do have a college football bet and a college basketball bet. I will let you give those out whenever you want, or right now in whatever order you want.
So for college football, we're gonna take Iowa -5.5 tonight. And I know what you're thinking, Jay Smith. UCLA is playing better.
They are.
They look like a totally different team. Ethan Garber is carving up defenses. Iowa looks a little shady. Yeah, I hear you, but I still think Caleb Johnson is the third best running back in the Big Ten. I still think UCLA has a ways to go. I think Iowa needs this win very, very badly. I think UCLA is already playing with house money at this point with the way that they started their season. My projections say Iowa -11.7, over a two-score victory. Give me the Hawkeyes. I know they're not the same Hawkeyes we're used to, but think they do enough tonight. And UCLA's kind of run here, they kind of get taken back down to earth.
Okay, I like it. And what's your college basketball bet? Which every time I look on Twitter, you're hitting all of them. So you're off to a good start. It seems like.
So college basketball is kind of like the genesis of this whole thing. I'm sure you remember last year when I kind of took off a little bit on social media, started working with some, pretty high profile people in the betting space, and like college basketball is my bread and butter with this. So I'm really excited the season's back. I have a ton of bets tonight that I'm taking over on my Patreon, but I want to give you guys one that I'm very confident in, and that's UMass +9.5 against the DeVries, the West Virginia Mountaineers.
Okay.
I know you're thinking, I know what you're thinking, but I just want everyone to be on notice right now that UMass is a real contender to make the tournament this year and maybe cause some issues in March. You hear UMass and you don't think very good, but they were pretty decent last year. They had some pieces. I think this year they're getting even better. I think West Virginia is obviously going to be better this year, but look out for UMass. They're heading to the MAC in football next year. They're trying to build up their athletic programs, and I think they have a good basketball team. My projections call for West Virginia -7.5. That's not a huge edge when I look at my model, but with all those things considered, with the new season starting, it just sets up perfectly for a cover here.
Sounds good. So we're taking Iowa tonight -5.5, and we're taking UMass +9.5 against West Virginia in college hoops. Sounds good. I'll probably bet those when I get home. Once again,
any comment on the Iowa game?
I just find it interesting that 2 weeks ago you said that your favorite team to bet was UCLA, and now you're betting against them.
UCLA was on an absolute heater for me. They had like 20+ point spreads like 3 weeks in a row, and I was just slamming it all, and they were covering. But the market's kind of caught up to that, so it's kind of swung back the other way. You know how it goes.
So it's kind of like Indiana, where Indiana was just favored by a touchdown every week, and the market hadn't caught up yet. Except for UCLA, it's different. Instead of them being 20-point dogs, now the number's just more correct. I think we've seen the same thing with Indiana.
So it's funny you said that. I actually feel the same way about the Indiana line this weekend. So bonus pick, I actually am taking Michigan +14.5. I think Indiana controls the game. I think they win the game. I can't see 2+ touchdown margin of victory. I still think Michigan's a competent defense. They have NFL players on that defense. They're still going to be physical. I see Indiana controlling the game, like I said, but I would be shocked if
if Michigan lost by more than 2 touchdowns.
That's kind of how I feel. You should have waited. It's 15.5 at some places now. The line just keeps it keeps going up. Joined by Zack Gray, not only a friend of the program but also the best sports gambler that I know. He does a great job. I'm with you. I think part of it too, and why I bet Michigan is because they're going to run the football a lot, and I think really try to shorten the game. And so I just don't know if Indiana is going to have enough time to go up by more than two touchdowns.
Are you concerned about their slow start last week? Do you think that creeps up in any of these games down the stretch?
Talking about IU? No, I'm not worried about it. I think that the slow start last week was weird. It was their first real road game. Like, I know Michigan State's like, it's not the big house or anything like that, but like their other road games were at UCLA, which, no one goes to those games. And then their other road game was at Northwestern, and they're playing at their practice field with like 100 people in the stands. So I think like the first real Big Ten road game, Curtis Rourke, he missed the week prior with a thumb injury. I just think it took him a minute. And then once they got going, 47 straight. I've got really no worries about it.
And they're equipped to kind of have to withstand slow starts with the way that their offense is this year. So I agree. It's probably not concerning. It's just something I'm looking at and going, what's the path here for Indiana to kind of come back down to earth? And I think it starts. I think a slow start is the kryptonite there for them, because I think if you get into a dogfight with them, I think Cignetti's tough enough. I think he's gotten that team mentally tough enough to kind of withstand that against a team like Michigan. I don't know about Ohio State, but you kind of get my point. I think they're just built to kind of come back from those slow starts.
They are. You being an Ohio State fan, you better hope it's not a dogfight, because the Buckeyes are soft. I'm just telling you.
Oh yeah, it's very soft when you run out the last 5 minutes in a top 5 matchup.
I know. I'm just kidding. I was just giving you a hard time. What's your rant? You texted me this. I can't remember if it was last night or this morning, and I've just been looking forward to it ever since. I'm assuming it has to do with the Bengals, given what happened last night, but I could be wrong on that.
So the Bengals are the reason why it's finally bubbled up to the surface. I've been having these thoughts for a while now. And Jay Smith, we have to stop blaming coaches for everything. If you can't tell me what play call you would run instead of the one that was called, then you can't be so arrogant to think that it's just the coach's fault and you don't know anything about what's happening on the field, the court. You just watch it and go, oh, that was a pass play, or oh, that was a run play. But you don't understand what the game plan is, the scheme is, what formation they're in, why they're in that formation. So if you don't know any of that, you should be a little humbler to maybe think, maybe I don't know what's going on, and maybe it's not always the coach's fault. I saw people last night blaming Zach Taylor, and Zach Taylor put up, went down. The fumble happened and things started to unravel. The Ravens go up and he calls a one-play shot play touchdown.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. Like that is the perfect play call for that defense they were in, for what they saw. They hit a 13-second one-play touchdown, tied the game up. And then at the end of the game, when their defense is Swiss cheese, and that's a whole nother topic. I just don't think the roster is very talented.
I agree
across the board.
Outside of Hubbard and Hendrickson, it's bad.
Yeah, and so you're facing a game-winning drive, possibly a game-winning drive, and you march down the field and you don't use your timeout for 80-something yards. You drive all the way down the field, score a touchdown, and still don't use your timeout. That sounds like damn good coaching to me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So it's just one of those things where, like, if it's just the easiest thing to do, I guess, and I think you might agree, for someone that doesn't really understand what they're watching, and is just kind of like just a normal fan, like, I get it. It's the easiest thing to blame. But at the same time, if someone is saying that does know what they're saying, says, hey, it's not on the coach here. Like, this quarterback just got torched in man-to-man coverage. Everything, it was the right call. He just didn't execute. And they go, no, as the coach, it's play calling. And they won't get off that. It just bothers me so much. And, like, I know I shouldn't care about it because I am a psycho when it comes to analyzing sports, not only like schematically, but obviously the data and everything. But like, just if someone obviously knows more about the actual product on the field, what's happening, the intricacies, and you just say, no, you're wrong, it's the coach, that just makes my blood boil, dude.
I'm with you. Joined by Zack Gray. Follow him on Twitter at ZG the Grapevine. If you check out the link in his bio, it'll take you to his Patreon where he offers tools to help you hit more bets. He also gives out picks with that subscription as well. Zach, I'm with you. Fans are very reactionary, and like I'm the same way. Like I'm assuming Bengals fans were upset last night because the 2-point conversion failed. Is that right?
They were upset. I think most rational people understood that decision. They just think that every loss is because of Zach Taylor.
Yeah. Well, it can't be Joe Burrow's fault. He has frosted tips now.
Oh boy. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, it wasn't Joe Burrow's fault last night. He played about as perfect as you could play.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like those third and short and that fourth and short where he threw 2 deep balls, like people are acting like they had 9 linemen on the field and that was the only route available. There was 1 receiver on the field. Like that, like
you crack me up, man.
Like that's not,
and you're right. I'm with you.
Oh.
Can I throw a theory your way, or do you have more on this topic?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think Tyrese Maxey's injury is Joel Embiid's fault.
Oh, goodness.
So, Joel Embiid hasn't played a game all year, right? And because of that, Tyrese Maxey's load has been heavier, right? No Paul George. He's having to do everything for the offense. He's got the ball in his hands basically the entire game. And he hurt his hamstring. That is usually a load-based injury. And so I feel like if Joel Embiid actually played basketball like he was paid to do, then Tyrese Maxey never would have gotten hurt because the load for him would have been a lot lower. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I obviously think you're saying that tongue in cheek, but I think there is something.
I am.
I think I think that's obviously a good reasoning as to why he got hurt. My thing is when it comes to stuff like that, like, injuries are random, things happen, but then you go ahead and you start to think, based on your theory, like shouldn't every athlete on the roster prepare as if they have to play the full 48 minutes? And shouldn't that be a non-issue, like being tired, 7 games into the season or, breaking down 7 games into the season? And I don't know, I'm not saying that's Tyrese Maxey, but you start to think about that stuff and it's like, boy, Joel Embiid, should be on the floor. That's what he gets paid to do. But like those other guys, like if you want to win and you want to be, at the top of the Eastern Conference, like the Sixers are, saying they want to do and what they expect, like all those other guys have to be ready. And that doesn't mean just, making shots. That means being physically ready to withstand the extra load.
Totally agree. Joined by Zack Gray, professional sports gambler. Follow him on Twitter at ZG the Grapevine. Check out the Patreon in his bio to get the tools he uses to make his picks. We've only got a few minutes here. I want to give you an opportunity to guess what you think we took this week for the Kirk Cousins Bet of the Week. For the listeners who don't know what that is, we take a road underdog on the money line every week ever since Kirk Cousins said we're going to walk in their trap and take over their trap. So what do you think the bet was this week, Zach?
Road underdog, right?
Road underdog.
Are you taking the Broncos?
I am not. I thought about it. I really did. But then I thought back to how Bo Nix has looked against good teams and it hasn't been pretty. And so I ended up taking the Steelers on the road against the Commanders.
That was my second pick, Jason. I was thinking in my head which one I wanted to go with, and I went with the wrong one.
It's all good. It makes the most sense. I don't trust Bo Nix enough quite yet. Whereas like Jaden Daniels, the Commanders have played one good defense all year. It was the Bears, and the Commanders scored 18 points. Really only should have been 12, but Tyreek Stevenson decided to celebrate before the game was over. And that's still so funny. I'm so glad that happened. And so, like, I just think Jaden Daniels is going to struggle a bit this week just because the Steelers have one of, if not the best defense in the NFL.
Yeah, and I guess I just kind of have to come to grips with the fact that the Steelers might be good. I have not
I'm with
thought they were good. I haven't thought they've been good all year. Like, I don't think they're a good team, but I guess, like, you are what your record says you are. So I guess I just kind of have to accept they might be good.
I'm going to keep it at might. I do the top 10 teams in the NFL every week. I didn't rank them this week. I don't think they're one of the 10 best teams in the NFL.
Why are they 6-2 then? It makes no sense.
It really doesn't. Like, the defense is awesome. Maybe it's just I saw Russell Wilson play for the Broncos and crap down his leg every snap that he took. And so I just refuse to believe in it.
Now, to be fair, looking at their schedule, they have not played really like the top of the league. Like,
they haven't.
So maybe that's got something to do with it. My NFL fandom died last night on a 2-point conversion.
Yeah, that's brutal.
So I may be able to take a step back in the AFC North and really evaluate. But, up until last night, I was just fighting for my life in the division. So, we're dead there. So I might be able to understand why the Steelers are actually good.
Well, you guys can still make the wild card. The Broncos are fine. The Colts are going to lose on Sunday. They'll be 4-6 along with the Bengals. And then you'll just have to find a way to catch the Chargers, that's a possible thing.
Well, that's who we got next week before the bye. So
big game.
Time to hop on the emotional roller coaster again.
Sounds good. Zach, I got to run. Thanks for your time as always, man.
Yep. Jay Smith. Thanks.
See ya. That is Zack Gray. Follow him on Twitter at ZG, the Grapevine. As I said, one of the best sports gamblers that I know. That's going to do it for the Real Jonathan Smith Show. I'll be back on the air tomorrow from 10 to noon. The Dan Dockett Show comes your way here in 5 minutes.